Happy Sabbath, everyone. It's good to be here with you today. It's good to be back home. So, I have some questions for you. Why does life matter? Human life. Why does marriage matter? What is sin? Why did Jesus suffer? Why do we need a new heaven and a new earth? See, Genesis provides the foundation for understanding all these concepts. Ultimately, our whole worldview depends on the truth of God's word beginning in Genesis. It's a or the foundation of our faith. The above questions in my intro for today, I've taken from the book Prepare to Thrive, a survival guide for Christian students. And it's by a young lady named Patricia Engler. I read the first part of her book, and this young lady, she's working on her PhD. And I find her to be very exceptional and astute. I had a chance to listen to her at a lecture and talk with her. I purchased two of her books. One's a workbook and the workbook is based off of the title that I gave you. And Robin and I met her while we were in Kentucky and when we went to the Creation Museum. And I'm going to say this, okay? Creation Museum isn't perfect, but I'll tell you, it is a wonderful place to visit and to go check out. Anyway, she gave a particular talk on it, and like I said, she was astute. She has a lot of good stuff. I've read several chapters in her book now, and a lot of the stuff she says is quite accurate. There's some things, their theology isn't totally what we would agree with, but what I will say is the stuff that she has right would work for us or anybody that's a Christian. In any case, Robin and I went to the Creation Museum. We also went to the Ark Encounter when we were in Kentucky, when we were visiting our daughter in Ohio. We also had a special Sabbath when we were in Ohio. My daughter's pastor arranged for Arnold Mendez, a pastor in Texas from Cagua, to give a Bible study and services about Noah's Ark and early man, which covered pre and post flood information. And this is, I will state as my opinion because I'm sure other people will disagree with me, needs better education available in this particular area, especially for our children. For us as adults, evolution doesn't normally bother our life. I mean, we may hear about it, it may bother us, but we can usually overlook it because we look at the Bible and we're pretty ensconced in it and know what we believe. So evolution is going to, be a very small part of our lives. But for our children that are growing up, that have to go to school every day and listen to teachers that talk about evolution and say how the Bible is fairy tale and evolution is this wonderful thing in science. Well, the people that do the Creation Museum, Mr. Arnold Mendez, who gave us the talk, they have wonderful information. And basically, the wonderful information is evolution. I mean, sometimes we give too much credit to what people from evolution or scientists say because it's science. Well, believe me, it's a mirage. It's more of a fairy tale than what they call the Bible. I mean, it is so totally fake. It's unbelievable. But the thing is you and I would have a hard time convincing our kids that it's fake because we don't have the whole background that goes with it. Whereas the creation people from the Creation Museum and people that are related to, like we went to the Ark Encounter, they have good information, valid information that can be used in debunking these people that don't know what they're talking about, but think they do. That's the thing. Or at least making it difficult for them. So I'm going, any case, for more information, Mr. Mendez's website is amendez.com. amendez.com. He has a lot of information on his website that you can download or listen to and get some information. One of his things is to travel to different church areas and give his talk. Of course, that has to be paid for. So, and the stuff that was arranged in the Ohio area was done, and it was like I said, we had a great time there. We went to the Creation Museum ourselves. We went to the Ark Encounter with Mr. Mendez, and we get to see things. Did we agree with all things there? By no means. But we heard some interesting things, some things that your kids listen to, some things that we even hear on a daily or almost a daily basis, depending on kind of what your phone is plugged into and what it brings up. That has really good information. The Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum are all part of one particular organization, and it's Answers in Genesis. And if you add .com to that, you'll get to their website. Now, they're young Earth creationists. Do I have that right? Yeah. They're young Earth creationists, the people from Answers in Genesis. In other words, the Earth as well as the universe is no older than 6,000 years old. And the book that I mentioned at the start, that I quoted from, that said all those things, that make sense. That's what basically what they believe came from that. But even though they believe that particular thing, again, they have strong and solid arguments on why evolution is bad. Now, am I promoting everything that they're saying? No. I mean, you have to have wisdom on what's accurate and, on their biblical teachings and what is inaccurate. So, and one of the things that they don't accept is what we refer to as the gap theory. And they find that totally unacceptable. And some of their reasons for finding it unacceptable are quite understandable. So, but the title of my sermon today is Genesis, Creation Stuff. Now, one of the reasons why the young Earth creationists don't like the gap theory is they feel that, one, the theory came into being after geologists from the late 1700s, maybe the middle 1700s onwards, started suggesting that the Earth is very old. And so they think that, and actually they're right, that a lot of theologians kind of went along with the possibility that the Earth was old, and they actually brought what we would call syncretism, into church teachings. And the way they did it was by using the gap theory, saying there was a period between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. That could be a length of time. And again, like I said, these young earth creationists don't want to allow for any of that. So they've taken the approach that that's not good. There's other things too, but I don't want to go into those. Basically, what I will say the the young earth creationist approach is, one, they're against the lies of evolution. So they're going to give you good information. This is what I like about them. Okay, against the lies of evolution. They're against secular humanism and its soul-rotting results, what it does to us if we go along with that thinking. They are very much for the belief in the Bible and what it says, literally. So just the fact that they want to hold on to that is very important, just like we do. I mean, we believe the Bible. Now, I mean, even some of us, we have different groups of the church that don't get along, but even teach certain things, and we can argue about those things. So we're not necessarily wonderful ourselves. They respect God because they want to do and believe in the Bible. I mean, you can't fault them for that. And they want others to respect God. They want to teach you about these things, just like the church does. And again, and their belief and their understanding of the gospel is different, but they believe the gospel to a certain degree, their way of believing the gospel, and they want to share it. So, those things being said, those are the good points. We should have some of these things as strong points for us. So now let's go into the creation. So today, so maybe not to get them so excited, I'm going to talk about the gap or the lapse theory. I kind of tried to rename it. You may come up with something else, but it better explains prehistory, history, and some ideas from the past that we need to reject, that even the church went into. The church did go into a certain amount of syncretism with evolution. And I may get into that in a little bit. So let's see what the Bible tells us about pre-creation, which we have to start with God. John 1:1. Why do I say pre-creation? Because it's before there was anything. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And we know this is talking about Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ was in the beginning with God. Whether you want to look at that as being always with God, because if he was in the beginning with God when the earth and the universe was created. So either way, it all fits together. He was with God, he was God, and on it goes. Colossians 1:15, this is also what it says about him, because there's several things that talk about Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Remember, he was the wave sheaf offering. He was the first person. He became man and then was raised to be the Son of God, because when he was the Word, he wasn't the Son. So he's the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, that are visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things consist. This is our elder brother, who we call Jesus at this point in time. Nehemiah 9:6 says, "You alone are the Lord. You have made the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and everything on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve them all. The host of heaven worships you." Ephesians 39:9, which from the second half, which from the beginning of the ages has been hidden in God, who created all things through Jesus Christ. And then before we get into the meat, Psalm 33:6, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. John 1:1 said, the word was with God. Psalm 33 says, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made. God spoke and things came into being. Genesis 1:1. So let's start. Genesis. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now, what has been a argument of, or what the church has taught is, it says, and the earth was without form and void. And we look at that and say, well, that doesn't sound, the church has said, just point blank, that doesn't sound like something God would create, that something being form and void. So we've put together other scriptures that go along with it that show how things could be. And this is part of the things that the church has taught. Take Job 38:4. Now, a lot of the things I'm going to say are what you've heard over the years, but some things I hope I'll bring some new light to. Job 38:4. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were the foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? Then he says, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now, if they shouted for joy after God laid the foundations of the earth, why would they shout for joy if the earth was without form and void, and waste and desolation? Because that's what the Hebrew words mean. And I think they picked something that was a little less descriptive when in this particular version of the Bible, without form and void. Desolate and waste. So why would the angels have shouted if things were desolate and waste? Remember, God spoke, the heavens and the earth came into being. And then when it did, as God said here in Job 38:7, the sons of God, who are the angels here, shouted for joy. Well, again, and the reason why we put it is it says the foundations were laid. The foundation of the earth was laid at this time when God spoke. And that's why the angels shouted for joy, because things were beautiful. Then in verse 2, so verse 2 says, and the earth was form and void, waste and confusion. And then it says darkness was on the face of the earth, and the Spirit of God hovered over it, and then God said, let there be light. So what we're so the lapse or the gap theory basically says something happened to the earth for it to become waste or without form and void, desolate and waste, or waste and desolate, however you want to describe it. What happened? And then when God decided to fix it, he waited. I mean, we don't know how long it was. We don't know how long it was when God decided to fix things. And we can say, well, why didn't God try to fix it immediately? Why did he possibly take what we would think thousands of years or millions of years or whatever? I mean, we don't know. Why would God wait that? Well, let's take an example that God gives us in the Bible. Turn to Exodus 1, verse 14. Exodus 1, verse 14. Here is when Israel was in Egypt, and the Pharaoh forgot who the Israelites were, who Joseph was. And they started making lives bitter for the Israelites because they were becoming such a numerous people. In verse 14, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it's a daughter, you shall make her live. She can live. And the midwives feared God. It did not do as the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, commanded them, but saved the male children alive. And it says that the Pharaoh said, why are you doing this? And the midwife said, well, they're not like the Egyptian women. They have the babies before we get there. Any case, the end of the chapter, verse 22. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Okay, so this is the beginning of the story. Now let's go to chapter 2. And chapter 2 starts off with basically what we find out is the birth of Moses. And so Moses' mom and dad put him in the river, and the Pharaoh's daughter took him. Now, Moses had an older brother whose name was Aaron. He was a few years older. We don't know if Aaron had to go through this particular thing. We don't know if the king's decree came after Aaron was born. It could have been at the same time, but somehow the situation changed, and now there was a lot of pressure being put on the Hebrews, and this is what Moses' mom had to do with Moses, put him in the river. Well, Moses grew up in the court, and at about 40 years old, he killed an Egyptian. They found out about it, and he fled. And he fled to Midian. Remember, this is 40 years. The Israel is going through all this, trying to get their male babies killed. 40 years. He flees to Midian. He lives a good life for a while, and then finally, about 80 years old, God appears to him, the burning bush, and God talks to him. But at the end of chapter excuse me, at the end of chapter 2, in verse 23, it says, "Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died." So Moses is in Midian. He's been there a number of years, and we're going to find out he's about 80 years old. And the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their crying came up to God because of the bondage. Verse 24, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Now remember, this is 80 years later, where we see Moses coming before God and God telling Moses, okay, go back. 80 years the Israelites had to live like this. And it could have been longer, but this is the story that God had. And the most important thing to remember through this is God remembered. God didn't have Israel out of his mind. He knew what was going on, but it was God that had his plan, and God told Abraham that they were going to be in Egypt a certain period of time, and it was time for Israel to come out of Egypt. So what I'm trying to say is for some reason, God waited a while and then decided to do something, the renewal of the earth in verse 2. Now, before But why, I guess we can, so I didn't answer the question of how the earth got into this chaos and confusion. But I did say God waited. So turn to Genesis 1:31. Genesis 1:31. And there it says, and God saw everything that he'd made after the creation of man that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. God said everything was good. The next day he rested on the Sabbath, and everything was very good. Genesis 2:9, and insert another way of looking how God did the creation. And it tells us another story, Genesis 2:9. And out of the ground, God made every tree grow that was pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was there as well. In Genesis 2:16, the Lord commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge followed by what happens. In the Hebrew, it's usually some form of that same word. From a technical way to say it is, it says something similar to you will die in your death. But that really doesn't make sense to us. You will die in your death. So we translate it to surely die. So if you look up the word surely, if they give you the Hebrew number there, you'll see it's probably all kinds of different Hebrew words. But in any case, usually it's the one of the forms of the word that follows it. And there, it's all throughout. It's a Hebrewism in the Bible. How it, how they do their idioms is probably a decent way to say it. So God told Adam and Eve about the tree, or should I say excuse me, God told us that he made the tree of life. Now, I don't see anywhere in there where he tells Adam about the tree of life or and that it was accessible to him. As far as I'm concerned, God didn't publicize the tree of life. But he did tell Adam and Eve about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he told them, don't mess with it. Then in verse 3, now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Okay, so the serpent made a false statement or a false question. It's kind of hard to say it was a lie, but it really was pretty close to it, what he said to her. So we should be aware that, when Adam and Eve were put in this, and God said everything was good, and Adam and Eve hadn't sinned yet, this thing called, you know, the serpent was allowed to be there. God had made the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, and it was there. And God said everything was good. The garden was good. Where man lived was good. Things hadn't gone bad yet. That's true. See, God gave Adam and Eve a choice. So the 2 points I want to mention is, besides what I just said, is that the serpent or Satan was there, and the thing is he had already sinned. 2, man at that point was still sinless. So now let's take a closer look at the serpent, the adversary, who we call Satan, or we call Lucifer. And if you look in the Bible, you'll find Lucifer doesn't really exist in our Bible. That's translated that, and it's as far as I'm concerned, it's translated from the Vulgate. He was called Lucifer there in the translation from the Hebrew to the Latin. And there, I mean, you can, if even for people that don't read Latin, and I don't, you can actually see the word Lucifer. Some of the little tidbits. Any case. So, but in our Bible, so they translated it Lucifer because it became part of our culture. So now let's go to some background on this serpent, this Satan, the adversary. And in Luke 10:18, Jesus says, and he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Wow. He saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So now let's go into what we see, and I don't know why any case, we all have different ways of looking at things. Isaiah 14, one of the first things that give us a fair amount of information about Satan. Isaiah 14, verse 12 says, how have you fallen from heaven? And here's where it says, oh, Lucifer. This is where the Latin has Lucifer, and it got translated from the Latin rather than the Hebrew. O Lucifer, son of the morning. How are you cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations? These are descriptions not of a man, these are descriptions of in this case, a being. And we'll learn a little more as we go. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Stars of God meaning the angels. I will sit on the mount of the congregation, on the furthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. And then God says, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, the grave, the pit, to the lowest depths of the pit. Now, Ezekiel 28:12, another reference to where Satan is, says, Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. What man can meet that type of description? And now continue. Let's listen. You were in Eden. Who was in Eden? The garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the sapphire, the turquoise, the emerald, and gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day that you were created. Now listen to the position he had, and then listen to what God says. I mean, this isn't a person. You were the anointed cherub who covers. And what did he cover? He covered the ark of God. He covered God's throne. He said, I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. You were perfect in your way from the day that you were created. And then God says, until iniquity was found in you. He says, by the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. And he said, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. He removed them. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I laid you before kings that they might gaze upon you. Some of this, what he's talking about, is what's going to happen in the future, pictured by the Day of Atonement, pictured in Revelation 20. So I want to remind you again what Jesus said. And he said to them in Luke 10:18, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So now you see where Jesus saw this. In Revelation 12:7, he said, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for him in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called Devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So you see, Satan tried to go up. God allowed him to have an office around God's throne. It also seems like he had another position. And he tried to go up because if he had to be somewhere to go up if he was already, if he was the covering angel. So he had to be somewhere. And it looks like, from what we can tell, it was the earth. It looks like the phone went dead. So another couple scriptures that you can put in is 2 Peter 2, 4 and 6, and Jude 1 to 6. So that's 2 Peter 2, verses 4 to 6, and Jude, verse 6, 1 6, if you have a Bible, because that's how you get to it. So now, that's where Genesis 2:1 comes in, how the earth was form and void, or was without form and void, because of Satan's sin. And because of Satan's sin, it brought destruction. They think it brought destruction in the universe as well as on earth. Some people will agree with that, some won't. But the thing is because of sin, that's why the earth had lack of was desolate and waste, without form and void. Now, another thing with the Genesis 1, 2, and 3, where is some people will say that verse where they try to ignore the gap, ignore the fact that now the earth was, waste and void, waste and tohu and bohu, without form and void. What they'll say is God actually, that's saying in Genesis in verse 2 that God, when he created the heavens and earth in verse 1, he actually created the earth with tohu and bohu. And God doesn't do things like that. So a better way to say it, rather than saying verse 2 is associated with verse 1, is to say verse 2. In fact, we'll see that it's goes better this way, not only for how the story reads, but even what it says. Verse 2 should actually go with Genesis 3. Verse 3, Genesis 1, 3. So it would go like this. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then this is when the first day really begins. Before this, where God was hovering, he was getting ready. He was putting things in order. Remember what I said in about Exodus. God remembered Israel. In this case, God remembered the earth. And then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. So you see, starting right there, God started to renew the face of the earth. It was a recreation. Now, why is this important? And again, I will refer back to the first part of the questions I asked. Is marriage important? Is life important? The old Genesis is not a bunch of fables. Genesis is not a myth. These things actually occurred. We know Satan rebelled against God. We know, or we should know, that God didn't create the earth in a state of waste. It became that way, and that's why he had to put things. In fact, when you look at what God didn't create the earth in verse 2. It was already created. And then he laid out a bunch of other things. When he put the sun and the moon in its place, he he probably fixed the path of the earth as well as their paths so that things would actually work. He was getting the earth ready for man. And why? Because he wants a relationship with man. Now, The one thing that I will mention, and what's nice about this is the stories that were told in the past, and I mentioned about syncretism, there was no pre-Adamic man. That is just a syncretism in church thinking. No pre-Adamic man. Everything happened, everything about man happened when God recreated the earth and put man on it. Remember, I said all the things about evolution are fairy tales. The people that I mentioned, go to their websites, learn more about their things. You can teach your children about some of these things because the information they have is worth knowing and being able to pass on. Case in point, Neanderthal man is man. Neanderthal man has certain characteristics that they don't want, they 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 just don't want to accept. But these people, Mr. Mendez, the creation, they have ways to explain it. They have ways to show that the Bible isn't a myth, evolution is. We have a great God. He gave us his word. We should be able to stand fast and tell our kids and have them have faith in what they are living and how they need to live. Because the Bible is the answer to our lives. Bible is the answer to history and prehistory. It shows us how things work if we're willing to dig. And with that, we'll do the blessing. Oh, forgot to put this in. Here we go. We go. The Aaronic blessing. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. God has blessed us because we know his truth and because we can share it with our children, our younger people, and that they can know that the Bible is true and not a myth, and that things like they call science, which isn't science, is the myth. How backwards is that, calling error truth and truth error?